Okay, we're looking at Brandy Station, The Clash of Cavalry, published by Rand Game Associates in 1976. Looking through the manual, they don't give any particular credits for the designer. I guess it was designed as a collaborative effort. There's a bunch of credits, but no single person took the credit for the design. Now, Rand Game publishers were always a bit of a strange company. They tried to break into the wargame market in a big way and were only partially successful. They took on some obscure titles like Brandy Station, and I certainly have to give them A for effort. They no doubt got their title from Fairfax Downey's book, Clash of Cavalry. This was published in 1959, so we're talking about a book that's over 48 years old. Now, Brandy Station was the largest cavalry battle fought on the North American continent, so it's quite an important battle, and I was glad to see Rand take the subject on. So I'm going to show you the board and the counters and tell you a little bit about this strange game, actually. Now, the version I have is a zip-locked game. It didn't come in a box, or at least not that I'm aware of. I bought it secondhand a few years ago. And like I said, Rand was always trying something new. And what they attempted to do was improve on the square grid on wargames. But before I show you what Rand did, I better explain what square grid games were like before Rand came along. Now, in our hobby, the first historical board war game is usually attributed to Charles Roberts, that designed Gettysburg in 1958, and this is the 1964 edition of the game, and it utilized a square grid. And I've just taken part of the board here and put a counter on it to show you some of the inherent problems with a square grid. Okay, as an example, we have Steinwehr's division here, Union, with a movement factor of 2, combat value of 3. And in the rules, Steinwehr could move 2 squares in any direction. It could go 2 north, 2 south, or 2 diagonally. Now, the inherent problem with it is that when a unit moves diagonally in a square grid version, he's actually moving further than moving straight left or right or up or down. And that's a spatial distortion that is not quite correct. It's not a big deal, but it isn't correct. And Rand decided to do something new and correct that aberration. Now, what Rand did was come up with a very clever system for handling that aberration. What they did was they put numbers on every single square on the board, and that was the number of movement points you expended to cross the terrain. Example, going left or right, Robertson here would pay 2 movement points, and if he moved diagonally, he would pay 3 movement points. So that's how they handled the spatial distortion. And when utilizing a road, which would be a very quick movement, you could do 1 movement point. So you see Robertson here could really scoot along this road at 1 movement point, and as long as you followed the road, like so, you'd only pay 1 movement point. So that's the way Rand handled the square grid. It was very innovative, and it was a good idea. Now, for all of its innovation, the square grid never really caught on in the hobby. Once games started using the hexagon grid, and Avalon Hill pioneered that with their Gettysburg game of 1960, I think it was, their second edition. Hexagon grids became the standard, and of course the advantage of the hexagon grid was that units could move in 6 different directions paying the same cost. So it's understandable why the square grid never caught on, but it's not a bad system. But I'll show you some of the other anomalies about using a square grid system, which Rand had to handle with special rules. Let's take a look at that. Now, the Rand Corporation did not use the term zones of control in their game. They used the term zones of influence. Now, you may remember that many hexagon grids have the zone of control concept, where the 6 squares around the unit are its zone of control, and any unit entering that zone of control must stop. Well, Rand had something similar. They had the 3 frontal squares called zones of influence, like so, and same thing for the Union, of course. And when a unit entered a zone of influence, it had to stop. Okay, no problem there. Makes sense. However, they had to have a rule to prevent units from going through enemy lines. Example. Okay, these guys are in the Confederate zones of control. They had to have a rule whereby you could not go through an enemy line. Because with the square grid, you've got inherent problems. What's to stop a unit from going merely from here to here? Well, nothing by the way the movement points, but they had to cover it with a rule. So you can just see some of the inherent problems with a square grid. But Rand handled it, and it worked very well in the game. But how innovative was Brandy Station as a game? Well, I'll show you the board, the counters a bit closer, explain the historical situation, and we'll see how well they did that. Okay, the Battle of Brandy Station occurred on June 9, 1863, which is, well, about a month before the Battle of Gettysburg. Right after this battle, Lee's army began its invasion of the North, so it's an important battle that prefigures the Gettysburg campaign. Now, the situation is this. This is the Rappahannock River, and north is generally this direction. Now, Brandy Station is here, and there's the railroad. So the situation is the Confederate cavalry is encamped here around Brandy Station, and Meade has ordered Pleasanton and Buford's division to perform a reconnaissance in force across the Rappahannock, because he wants to find out what Robert E. Lee's army is up to. And this is what caused the battle proper. Now, on the lower right here, you can see Confederate cavalry brigades watching the fords. At Kelly's Ford, Wheatley's, Norman's is open, and Beverly Ford is the ford up here in the north, where Buford and Pleasanton ultimately crossed. Now, the battle itself proper occurred here on Fleetwood Hill. Buford's men came across, Stuart's men reacted, and the bulk of the battle was here. So when you talk about the battle proper, it's in this tight area here. What we have is really the, I'm loath to say campaign, but almost the operational level battle of Brandy Station. In your game, the battle need not necessarily happen there. You want to give the Union some options. And I think this game is very good in showing that. You have lots of options for the Union. The game system itself, well, it wasn't all that innovative. They had a standard melee chart when units try to get into the same square. They had a little bit of a convoluted fire chart, and there was really nothing very innovative in the game system itself. The cavalry units, when mounted, can move quite far. So when you had, let's say, a unit like Hampton's Cavalry here, it's got a movement factor of 16. Well, if it comes along this road, it could really scoot. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. You get the idea. You could almost go halfway across the board on roads on this scale. The turn record consisted of 12 turns, with huge reinforcements for the Union coming on turn 3, a trickle coming in on turn 6. And it is mainly cavalry. There were some infantry close by at the Battle of Brandy Station. Ames' brigade of infantry was on the other side of the Rappahannock. But if I recall correctly in reading about the battle, the infantry didn't really become engaged until the very latter part. It's primarily a cavalry battle. Interesting to note the peculiarities, or showing you what the state of the hobby was at that time. And I'll show you why. I'm going to take a closer look at the counters. One of the questions I would love to have answered in our hobby is, what was the first game to have double-sided counters? Now, I've been gaming since 1969, and I can't answer that question. It might have been Avalon Hill's Alexander the Great. I'm not sure. If anyone can answer that question, I'd love to know. And the reason I bring it up is that in the Rand game, all of the cavalry counters had two sides. There was a mounted side, like Robertson's 5th North Carolina, and a dismounted side. But the dismounted side was another counter. You can see the original counters were quite thin. And you might notice that, gee, these are rather thick. How come? Well, what I had to do, well, I didn't have to do it, but I did, was I glued the other side to every single counter in the game. So they were double-sided, because it was a lot easier to have a dismounted side and a mounted side rather than fish through, 50 or 60 counters to find the dismounted side. So it just kind of shows you the state of the hobby at the time. Double-sided counters were not the norm. And if you ever do pick up the game, all you have to do is just glue the back side to the front. You'll have nice, thick counters that are perfectly serviceable. Nothing special about the Rand counters. They were okay. There's an artillery unit, K 1st US, and that's the unit unlimbered. You got a few leader counters. You got Hampton, and you got Stewart, and Buford, and Pleasanton. So I'm not going to say much more about Brandy Station. It was, I think, one of the neater Rand games, a subject that just hadn't been tackled before, but it was hardly innovative. How the game plays out, I don't know. I'm going to fool around with it now and see how it plays out. But it seems to be a very conventional war game. No great innovations there. I think the square grid was the main innovation in this game. Well, that's it for Rand Games' Brandy Station game. By the way, if you ever get a chance to pick up some of their other titles, you might want to try to get them. They are rare. You don't see them on eBay, or they're mainly on the collector's market now. People are asking a lot of money for them. But they're not really worth it. Their first game was Gettysburg, by the way, and every company on the planet practically does a Gettysburg game, and their first game was Gettysburg. It did use the square grid system, which is why I got sucked into buying it. I said, oh wow, Gettysburg with a new and innovative movement system. But the game itself was just terrible. The map was terrible. It's just a mess. I kind of wish I hadn't gotten rid of it, though, just so I could look at it again and just reminisce how bad things can get. But Brandy Station was one of the better titles. And if you get a chance to pick up Vicksburg, I seem to recall that it was half decent too. I don't have my copy anymore, but make no mistake, Vicksburg had its problems too. I remember there were some loopholes in the rules that just weren't covered. So that's our look at Brandy Station by Rand. And thank you for watching.